Today, we follow what happens when egotistic influencers try climbing Mount Everest. From stopping above 27,000 feet, to film-sponsored segments, to firing their Sherpas for not holding the camera correctly. The consequences that followed were so preventable and so brutal that they left the Sherpas, who witnessed them, permanently changed. It was April 22nd, 2017. An Everest base camp sat at 17,600 feet beneath a sky that had been clear for 4 consecutive days. The kind of clarity that made the mountain look manageable from below, which was exactly the kind of impression that killed people. Prayer flags snapped above the tent clusters on the Khumbu Glacier, juniper smoke drifting from the puja altar. Temperatures dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit overnight and climbed into the low 30s by midday. Among the climbers staged at base camp that spring was Ashley Mercer, 34, from Los Angeles, a fitness creator who had built 480,000 Instagram followers on a single brand identity, elite physical performance at extreme altitude. She had climbed Kilimanjaro and Aconcagua, both guided, both successful, both extensively documented. She arrived with a chest-mounted camera, a handheld unit, and a content calendar synced to 3 brand partnerships requiring specific shot types from each camp. The summit content alone carried a $14,000 bonus payable once she could prove she had reached the summit. She paid $67,000 to a mid-tier Nepali operator. Her Sherpa was Zangbu Chiring, 40, from Namche Bazaar. 9 Everest summits across 14 seasons, methodical and patient with inexperienced clients, but uncompromising when physiology demanded a hard call. His income supported his wife, 3 children, and his brother's widow following an icefall accident 4 years prior. The pattern that would kill Ashley Mercer was visible from the first week. At base camp, she declined the expedition's meal plan, citing sponsor obligations. Protein bars and supplements she had brought herself, photographed for her feed. Zangbu flagged the caloric deficit to expedition leader Rajan Gurung, who spoke with Ashley directly. She acknowledged the concern and made no changes. At Camp 1, she spent 90 minutes filming during a scheduled rest window, forced retakes at a ladder crossing because the lighting wasn't meeting her standards, and declined afternoon hydration to avoid water weight in photos. Other climbers in her rotation moved through the icefall and rested. By Camp 2, at 21,200 feet, the compounding was visible to Zangbu, even if it wasn't visible to Ashley. Her recovery was slower than it should have been, and she was losing weight faster than altitude alone explained. The kind of deficit that came from spending calories on filming rather than storing them for what was ahead. The summit push departed Camp 4 on May 16th at 11 p.m. Ashley climbed steadily through the lower southeast ridge, pace acceptable, oxygen at 4 liters per minute. Above the balcony at 27,600 feet, rest stops lengthened, and breathing became audible through the mask. Zangbu checked her saturation, 63%. He told her they were approaching the turnaround threshold. She told him they were approaching the summit. At approximately 27,800 feet, with the turnaround time already 40 minutes past, Ashley stopped on the fixed line and began adjusting her chest mount. She spent the next 22 minutes attempting to capture a sponsored segment, adjusting the mount angle, repositioning twice, checking playback on the handheld, and reshooting. Zangbu told her at the 5-minute mark that they needed to descend. At the 10-minute mark, he told her again with specificity about what her saturation meant at their current position. At the 15-minute mark, he placed his hand on her shoulder and told her directly that if she did not begin descending in the next 60 seconds, her body would not have enough reserve to make Camp 4. She held up one finger and asked for one more take. She got her footage. The descent began 23 minutes behind where it needed to be. For the first hour, it looked like she might make it. Then the reserves she had burned through 6 weeks of content creation, the skipped meals, the rest windows spent filming, the hydration avoided for camera aesthetics, reached their limit simultaneously. Her pace collapsed. Her legs stopped producing reliable steps. Zangbu supported her weight, adjusted her oxygen to maximum flow, and called expedition support on the radio. The nearest team was an hour below. At approximately 27,400 feet, Ashley Mercer sat down and could not get up. She died on the upper southeast ridge as the sun came up. Less than 1,000 feet below the summit, she had stopped to film. Zangbu conducted an extended search before confirming her position, remaining at extreme altitude for nearly 3 additional hours in temperatures that had dropped to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. The bare hand equipment management required, adjusting oxygen systems, managing carabiners, attempting to establish position on the radio, destroyed tissue across 6 fingers. Surgeons in Kathmandu amputated portions of the index and middle fingers on his left hand and the index finger on his right. The loss of grip strength and fine motor control made technical ice climbing unsafe. Zangbu Chiring did not return to expedition guiding. He took work at a trekking lodge in Namche, a few miles from where he had grown up, in a valley that had given the mountain everything it asked for and expected nothing back. It was May 4th, 2015, and the Western CWM, at 20,000 feet, was doing what it always did by mid-morning, turning the air between the walls of Nuptse and Lhotse into a compressed heat trap that drove temperatures past 40 degrees Fahrenheit while the rest of the mountain stayed frozen. Teams moved between Camp 1 and Camp 2 in the early hours to avoid the worst of it, and the route across the glacier required steady attention. The snow bridges spanning the crevasses below were invisible from above, and thinner than they looked. Derek Holt, 38, from Denver, had built 210,000 YouTube subscribers on a brand he described as raw and unfiltered adventure. Himself in extreme environments with minimal visible safety infrastructure, the camera always close. He had summited Rainier 3 times, completed a Patagonia traverse, and done enough technical climbing to understand the equipment. What he had not done was spend meaningful time above 20,000 feet. He paid $71,000 and was assigned Chewang Norbu, 43, from Kumjung, 11 summits, 17 seasons, known for being direct in ways that less experienced operators occasionally found difficult. His income supported his wife, 4 children, and his mother. The conflict was established within the first week. Chewang enforced rest stops without negotiation, declined to film from exposed positions while managing rope, and refused to hold camera equipment during technical sections. Derek raised the issue with expedition leader Sonam Bhutia, framing it as a communication breakdown. His guide was obstructing the creative process. Sonam understood what the conversation actually was, a $71,000 client threatening to walk. He reassigned Chewang to logistics at base camp and elevated Pembal Haktan, 29, from Forza to primary guide. Pemba was on his 3rd Everest season, technically capable, eager, and acutely aware of exactly why the previous Sherpa had been removed. The reassignment communicated something to every Sherpa on the team about whose judgment the operator would protect when it mattered. Chewang said nothing when Sonam delivered the decision. He moved his gear to the logistics tent and began tracking weather models. He had worked with clients who had died because no one experienced enough had been willing to force the issue. He knew exactly what kind of position Pemba was being placed in. Through rotations, Derek climbed without major incident. Pemba filmed from positions Chewang would have refused, held the handheld during transitions, and adjusted pace for content at each camp. The summit push departed Camp 4 on the night of May 19th, under conditions that looked stable at departure. 4 hours in, above 27,000 feet, the weather shifted faster than forecast. Cloud built from the southwest in layers. Wind increased from manageable gusts to sustained pressure that made forward movement costly. 3 teams ahead of Derek's position turned around within 90 minutes of each other. Pemba told Derek they should consider descending. Derek pointed at the 2 pushes, still moving above them, and said they were fine. Pemba registered the same concern Chewang would have registered, with none of the standing to act on it the same way. He knew why he was standing on this mountain instead of someone else. He did not push back with the force the situation required. At approximately 28,200 feet, visibility dropped into a complete whiteout, driven by 50-mile-per-hour gusts. Derek became disoriented within minutes. The fixed line was still there, but the spatial reference points that told a climber which direction the line ran had dissolved into white. He drifted east off the route toward the Kangshung face and was lost to visibility within 30 seconds. Pemba called his name into the wind and followed the fixed line east for as long as the conditions allowed a human being to survive unclipped. He found nothing. He returned to the line after 28 minutes and descended to Camp 4 with both feet already showing the white patches of advancing frostbite. Derek Holt's body was located 4 days later, approximately 350 feet east of the standard route at 28,100 feet. He had simply walked off the edge of a terrain feature he could not see. Pembalakdan lost portions of 2 toes on his right foot. The damage made crampon fit on technical terrain unreliable and painful. He worked one more season in a support role below Camp 2 before accepting his body would not take him higher again. He left high-altitude work at 30. At base camp, Chewang Norbu had monitored the radio communications through the night. He had heard the weather reports, the deteriorating transmissions, the long silences that followed, and he understood exactly what each one meant. He contracted with a different operator the following season and returned to Everest for 2 more years. He guided carefully and without incident and did not speak about that night to other climbers unless they asked directly. It was May 8, 2016, and Camp 3 at 23,500 feet clung to a narrow shelf cut into the Lhasa face, a 45-degree wall of blue ice that caught afternoon sun and radiated cold back at night until the tent walls iced from the inside. Wind across the face was a constant high note that everything else had to compete with. Ryan Voit, 41, and Cassandra Voit, 38, from Nashville, had spent 3 years building a joint travel channel with 165,000 subscribers on the back of one simple formula. The two of them, somewhere extraordinary, making it look effortless. Everest was supposed to be the biggest episode they had ever produced. They arrived with separate cameras, separate narrative arcs, and an agreement about who would own which angles for the final edit. But the agreement had collapsed twice before they even left base camp. Higher up, the competition stopped being annoying and started being dangerous. They split from each other on sections of route to get independent footage, argued over rest stop positioning, and put themselves in places their shared Sherpa, Mingmar Wangchuk, 37, from Pangboch, had to track simultaneously. Mingmar had 8 Everest summits and supported his wife, 2 young daughters, and his aging father, whose medical care in Kathmandu required steady payments each season. He had managed difficult clients before, but he had never managed 2 people competing against each other at 23,000 feet. Each one pulled him aside privately to raise concerns about the other, but neither one was willing to acknowledge anything about their own condition. He escalated his overall concern to expedition leader James Whitfield, who spoke to them together. They closed ranks immediately, a united front. No symptoms acknowledged, 2 climbers who were fine. Ryan was already sick. The cough had started 2 days below Camp 3. Dry at first, then producing fluid on deep exhales by the time they arrived. Mingmar heard the faint crackling in the lower lobes during a routine equipment check and told Ryan exactly what it meant and what it required. Ryan told him it was a cold from the dry air, then asked him to step slightly left because he was standing in Cassandra's shot. Cassandra's coordination had been declining since Camp 2, fighting fumbled clips, misjudged reaches for the fixed rope, a stumble on flat ground she laughed off on camera. What they added up to, in Mingmar's assessment, was 2 climbers who needed to go down. The signed waivers and their joint refusal left Whitfield with no grounds to remove either of them. That night at Camp 3, Ryan did not run overnight oxygen, a rationing decision based on calculations from an online forum. The pulmonary edema progressed without supplemental flow. A climber in a neighboring tent heard labored breathing around midnight and flagged Mingmar, who unzipped their tent at 4 a.m. and found Ryan unresponsive, lips blue, chest producing the wet, rhythmic sound of lungs filling faster than they could clear. Cassandra was still breathing but not coherent, glassy, slow to respond, her eyes present but not processing. The cerebral edema that had been presenting as coordination failures had advanced overnight into something that could not be reversed at 23,500 feet. Mingmar woke the 2 additional expedition. Sherpas camped nearby and made the call. Cassandra's evacuation began immediately. Ryan's body was secured in the tent for the separate recovery. There was no version of this where both happened simultaneously on a 45-degree ice face with 3 people in the pre-dawn dark. The evacuation of Cassandra down the Lhasa face took 4 hours. Mingmar bore the primary load through the belay system, dead weight on steep ice, rope running through his hands and hips as the others managed below. By Camp 2, something in his lower back had given out. The examination in Kathmandu confirmed 2 herniated discs. The damage was not compatible with sustained load-bearing work above base camp. Cassandra Voit died during descent at approximately 22,200 feet, and Ryan Voit's body was recovered by a separate team 3 days later. Mingmar spent 6 weeks in Kathmandu for spinal treatment. The discs stabilized but did not heal to a standard that would support high-altitude guiding. He took a position managing equipment logistics for a trekking company in Namche, a job that kept him in the mountains, but off the routes where his spine could be asked for what it could no longer give. Quick reminder, if this kind of in-depth breakdown matters to you, subscribing helps keep these stories coming. Now let's get back to the mountain. It was May 14th, 2018, and the col at 26,300 feet that housed Camp 4 was doing what it always did at night, channeling wind between the south summit and Lhasa into sustained gusts that tested tent anchors and drove the wind chill toward minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The stars were extraordinary and useless. The cold was the only relevant fact. Natalie Voss, 43, from Portland, had built 320,000 followers on a clean performance philosophy. That genuine athletic achievement required the body to operate on its own resources rather than supplemental enhancement. She had written extensively about supplemental oxygen on Everest, characterizing it as a tool that obscured the truth of human performance. The position had become central to her brand. She had not, before this expedition, climbed above 19,000 feet. She paid $64,000. Her Sherpa was Chiwang Zongbu, 41, from Tame, 10 Everest summits, known for patience with difficult clients and precision in emergencies. He supported his wife, 3 children, and contributed to his nephew's school fees, following his brother's death in a trekking accident 2 seasons prior. The operator's written protocol required a minimum supplemental oxygen flow of 3 liters per minute above Camp 3, a condition of expedition participation, not covered by client waivers. Expedition leader David Core delivered the requirement to Natalie directly. More than once, she agreed verbally each time. Above Camp 4 on summit night, she reduced her regulator to 1 liter per minute. Chiwang caught it at the first rest stop above 26,500 feet, reset it to 3 liters, and explained what the difference in flow meant for cognitive function at their altitude. She reduced it again above 27,000 feet. He reset it. Above 27,200 feet, she reduced it a 3rd time. He reset it again, explaining that hypoxia was degrading the very judgment telling her the reduction was acceptable. She listened and reduced the flow a 4th time. 30 minutes later, at the balcony, her saturation measured 57%, despite the flow Chiwang had been fighting to maintain. The accumulated periods of reduced oxygen had done damage no reset could undo. Her pace had slowed to a crawl, rest stops extending to 5 and 6 minutes. Responses to his checks coming back slower each time. He told her they were turning around immediately. The message was reaching a brain that was no longer processing at full capacity. The hypoxia she had been courting had arrived, and it had brought exactly the cognitive impairment that made her incapable of understanding how serious her situation was. He began the descent with her, conscious but diminishing, answering questions with increasing delay, coordination, unreliable on the fixed line, requiring physical guidance through transitions. By 27,000 feet, she had stopped responding to verbal prompts. He was managing dead weight on a 45-degree slope in darkness, alone, in wind chill, approaching minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Natalie Voss died on the upper southeast ridge below the balcony before Camp 4 came into reach. Her body had run out of resources that 1 liter per minute had never been enough to sustain, and the reserves ran out at an altitude where there was nothing left to borrow from. The physical effort of managing her body down technical terrain, repeated overhead, loading through steep sections, ropes running through Chiwang's harness in conditions that had leached warmth from his shoulders hours before, tore his rotator cuff at the supraspinatus insertion. Surgery addressed the structural damage. The shoulder did not recover the load-bearing capacity high-altitude guiding required. Chiwang Zongbu did not return to expedition work. He took a position coordinating fixed-rope logistics from base camp, close enough to see the routes he had spent 20 years climbing, far enough that his shoulder was never again asked for more than it had left. It was May 12, 2016, and Camp 4 at 26,300 feet had the specific misery of high camps everywhere, tents anchored to a surface that didn't want them, wind finding every gap in the fabric, the air thin enough that doing nothing felt like exertion. Travis Enfield, 45, from Austin, had built 390,000 YouTube subscribers on outdoor gear reviews. Technically credible assessments his audience trusted because Travis clearly understood the gear. Everest was his ultimate review, every piece of kit documented from base camp to summit. He had climbed Rainier, Elbrus, and Aconcagua. He He paid $69,000 and arrived with a chest-mounted camera housing integrated into his harness to keep the lens unobstructed throughout the climbing system. The problem was the modification. To keep the camera housing flush and unobstructed, Travis had replaced his dedicated safety lanyard with a 60-centimeter sewn runner, a short loop of a webbing routed through his belay loop as a backup tether to the fixed rope. Every individual piece of gear was certified and rated, but a sewn runner is designed to absorb force in one direction, straight down. The moment a climber's body rotates on steep terrain, that force shifts sideways, and the stitching that holds a sewn runner together is not built for a lateral load. On flat ground at base camp, the modification looked functional. On a 40-degree ice slope at 27,600 feet, it was a single sideways pull away from failing completely. His Sherpa, Lakpa Tenjin, 35 from Kumjung, 7 summits, 8 seasons, technically precise during equipment checks, identified the configuration during base camp inspection, and flagged it to expedition leader Conrad Rains. Rains examined it, agreed the routing was non-standard, and required Travis to restore the original configuration before any rotation. Travis complied under Rains's direct supervision. Rains logged it and considered the issue resolved. At Camp 4 on summit night, during gear checks before departure, Travis re-rigged the modification. He told Lakpa Tenjin the configuration had shifted during the rotation, and he had restored what Rains approved. Lakpa Tenjin recognized that what he was looking at was not what Rains had approved. The departure window was narrow. The team was staged, other climbers already on the fixed line above. The weather window measured in hours, and Travis had clipped in and begun moving before the discrepancy could be escalated. Lakpa Tenjin followed, knowing exactly what Travis had done before they left camp. Through the lower southeast ridge and past the balcony, the modification held. Travis climbed at a strong pace with good oxygen management, the camera mount functioning exactly as designed. He uploaded footage from a satellite device for exactly this purpose, his engagement numbers climbing in real time while he moved through the death zone. At approximately 27,600 feet, at a transition point where the fixed rope changed anchors, Travis reached up to adjust the camera housing. The movement shifted his center of gravity leftward on the slope. His left crampon lost purchase on a patch of wind-scoured ice. His body rotated laterally. Not a fall, not a full stumble, the kind of half-second weight transfer that a properly redundant system absorbed without consequence. The 60-centimeter runner, loaded sideways through the belay loop at an angle its construction had never anticipated, failed at the Bartak. The stitching gave under the lateral force in a fraction of a second. The primary and improvised backup connection, positioned by the re-rig in a configuration where the runner's failure compromised both simultaneously, released together. Travis Enfield fell. Lakpa Tenjin was 3 feet behind him on the rope. The fall happened faster than calculation. He lunged, instinct operating before any conscious decision could form. The rope ran through his partially closed grip at speed, friction and force moving through his palm and across 3 fingers before the load transferred to the anchor above. He held the arrest. Travis did not survive the fall distance and the terrain below. Travis Enfield's body was recovered 2 days later from 27,200 feet. The camera housing was intact. The footage from his chest mount ran until the battery expired. Reconstructive surgery addressed the laceration damage across Lakpa Tenjin's palm and fingers. The deeper consequence was what the rope at speed had done to the tendons, partial tears that healed with scar tissue that was functional but not precise. The fine motor control that high-altitude guiding demanded simply was not there anymore in the way it needed to be. He spent 1 season in a rope-fixing role below the balcony before acknowledging what his hands were telling him. He retired from expedition work at 36 and took a position training young porters in the Khumbu, passing on what the mountain had spent 8 seasons teaching him. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now